Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of ZEISS Conversations. We're going to take it down a notch today, and we're just going to be three of us sitting around chatting, having a cup of coffee. It's almost like it's a daytime soap. What we're going to be doing, though, is talking about landscapes and how you can use a bunch of different methods, not only to craft the image technically, but really kind of using your eye to make sure that what's inside the frame is really giving you that artistic feel that you're looking for. Today, it's going to be my ambassadors and myself, Kenneth Hines on your left, Tracy Page on the right, and myself, Tony Wisniewski. I'm the marketing manager for Zeiss. We'd like to welcome you all here, and we're gonna grill Ken for a little bit today. So we're gonna put him on the hot seat. So welcome, Tracy and Ken. Glad to have you back again this week. Happy to see your smiling faces from the great state of Georgia. There
Yes.
you go. So welcome. So Ken, you had wanted to talk a bit about landscapes because we know that you have gone the way of the manual lately and really are trying to take what you're doing and really apply it to a different genre. We all know you as an Instagram focused person,
Streetscape.
yeah, who's doing street video or street photo, mostly in New York, but that's kind of where it's all built. But tell me how you're kind of applying what had you make the shift over to trying some landscape.
So what a lot of people don't know is that I started doing landscapes 12 years ago, but it wasn't until 2014, my business partner, he's the one that got me out in nature back in 2013, 2014. And so I kind of got back into doing it a lot more. But then 2 years later, went to New York, actually stayed there for part of the year, and my following built up on that work. So people have mostly known the street side.
Mm,
So with the pandemic taking place, I actually have time. I'm not traveling. This is a rarity in my life of not going anywhere. And I've been able to take the time to, can't do anything, can't, there's no streets to photograph or anything like that.
right.
And it's, to still be able to get out of the house and to, get some fresh air and things like that, I went back out into nature. And for the excursions that I've done, it's just my business partner and I. We're the only two people that are generally at these locations because we try to go to places that are not in the national park system. So that way we avoid any kind of crowds or things like that. So
Mm,
we're cautious in that regards to really get whatever location we're going to be secluded and just us there. So what brought me into using the Loxia lenses was when I joined Zeiss back in August of last year. I shot the Loxia lenses before, but I had never owned any. And so since I had the opportunity to, I said, well, let me try these three lenses because they were always, kind of on my list to one day, own those and use them. So I was just amazed that, they're much smaller, more compact, very small little lenses than what I shoot with the bodice lenses. And I was just amazed at the image quality. I'm like,
mm,
wow, I just really love these lenses. And the mechanical build of the lenses is something that I've missed. If coming from an old Sony A mount, I had the lenses that were, if you switched it to manual focus, you're actually getting a real manual focus experience. That's something that was not possible on the E mount mirrorless system.
mm,
It's a fly-by-wire system. So if you use an autofocus lens in manual, it's not the same thing. And so it's just something about that fully mechanical feel that I love. And then I noticed a difference in my Loxia images as opposed to my bodice lenses. I'm like, maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. No, I am crazy. I know that for a fact. So I just have been really using these a lot. My first time was my cruise earlier this year, where I
oh
took the
yeah.
21 and I decided not to take the bodice 25. I said, well, let me take the Loxia 21. I use that lens for most of the trip. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So when I did the landscapes, I decided to use the Loxias because of our ambassadors. We all know that Greg Waterman was very infamous for ever using the manual lenses, and he used to use all of the Loxia lenses, but now he's gone to Bodice. And now I have all the Bodice, and now I'm going to Loxia. And I just really love it. I'm kind of like Tracy's rubbing off on me with her manual Otises over there. I'm like, see, I have what I call baby Otis. Those are the Loxias.
Well, and that was one of the things that you just explained to me, which I guess because I've never really explored a lot of the technical things that the lenses do. Not that I'm not a technical person, I'm a very technical person. This is just some of this information is new to me. But I know, and I can explain to people the differences between a manual lens and an automatic lens used manually. I can tell you what I feel is different, but I didn't realize the fly-by-wire versus the mechanical system. Like, for example, I know that on my Otis lenses that the grip is a little bit wider than it is on some of the other lenses, and that it's very, very firm to my touch, so that even my slightest touch is making adjustments for me. And on a automatic lens, I don't find that to be true. I find it a little harder to adjust to the eye. I find it harder to see the adjustments, where with the Otis, it's so precise, I can see it really quickly. So I didn't realize the difference between did you say fly by wheel,
Wire.
Wire.
Yeah.
and mechanical?
Yeah, Tracy, one of the first times I met our friend Neil Van Nykerk, he was explaining to me, he uses at the time was using a competitive system, and he was telling me about how he had to actually jury rig the aperture because the aperture was camera controlled, for his time lapses. But the same thing is here. If you were going to do some stitching or something, the challenge is on fly by wire, the aperture is not necessarily going back to the exact place every time, or the servos might, you never know if that focus point is going to be exactly the same every time, and it may pose a challenge. Whereas, like you were saying, Ken, in mechanical, the when everything's mechanical, that aperture is going to be where you set it, no matter how many times you shoot. And that's the difference between the two. Thank you to Neil for showing me that. That was in.
Well, and that makes perfect sense, because you have images of mine that I've stitched, and I had no issues stitching it. Now I know why that's part of the reason why that is not one of the stitched images, but the one, right, that one is 3 images from the 35 stitched together. And not only did the aperture stay consistent, but also if you look at the buildings, I don't have my lines are all straight. I don't have any distortion going on, or very minimal distortion. I was able to handhold that and still stitch it.
Right, and that's that function of the ability of the mechanical aperture.
And that's on a 35 mil.
Gorgeous.
Thank you. I'm capable of landscape. See, I took that with Neil Van Niekerk about 3 years ago in Manhattan. We took it from the Jersey side. There was a rainbow completely over Manhattan. And so I'm Neil's driving. I'm like, can we stop?
How do you go to my city and take better photos of the skyline than I do? That's a great photo.
Thank you.
I like those. Wow.
Yeah, the other one, the gold one, I like that too. That was, and that's not a filter. That's not a preset in Lightroom. That is literally just shifting my white balance to my camera.
Yeah, it was that was a crazy weather day too.
Yeah, it really was.
Some major storm had passed over.
If you look a little bit to the left of that image, you can see the same rainbow.
Yep.
Wow, that's a very nice photo. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm just this is the first time I've seen these pictures, so I'm just like.
So I don't show my landscapes a lot. So I really love taking landscapes, but I don't. I'm a portrait person by profession, so I don't get a chance to really show my landscapes a lot. So Kenneth's not seen any of this stuff.
Yeah, I'm literally like a viewer right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is very nice images. Wow, I'm like. How in the world does he get those better than I can?
And I really kind of had, put them aside and forgotten about them. And Tony emailed me yesterday and, hey, send me those. I had to go find them. They were buried on a 2017 drive.
So those were shot with the Milvis?
They were shot. The mill
Okay.
was 35. Tony, was that a prototype at the time, or?
It was, yeah, it was one of the pre-productions that that we kind of let people borrow. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
no, because I remember you had come. Actually, you had come to visit me with
I
Neil.
did. I did. We
Um,
came to the office.
totally under the under a sham auspice of introducing me to Neil. And oh, by the way, can I borrow that lens? So
Oh, well, I think I was upfront about that.
it
Yeah,
was
that's
fun. Yeah, and of course, you know, that afternoon you got that shot, if I recall. So
wow.
And
Yeah,
you had sent me the lenses before the prototype, and then I'd sent them back. So it was
yep,
like, okay, now I need them
yep.
back again.
No, I'm just joshing with you. I was
I
so happy
know.
to see those images come out. They were really gorgeous. So yeah, no, happy. I'm happy to lend you lenses.
yeah. So yeah, so you know for a fact, is using a mechanical manual lens is
I
just so
just
much.
didn't, I don't ever use the automatic lenses. So it just really
Right.
never occurred to me what the difference was. And now I know how to describe that to people. I mean, I always tell them about the grip and the feel and the width of the grip and the butteriness of the grip and how sensitive it is. And then on a automatic lens, it's not built for that same specification. So you don't get that feel.
Yeah, I don't see how good that shows up, but
Yeah,
let's
it
see.
does.
Let's
So
get
the
that in
non-shiny part is the
focus.
grip there that he's showing you.
So, oh, there we go. So on there, you can see the markings on one of the Loxia lenses. And so the top portion, the numbers that are closer to the top, those are for your focus and what the range is, going from infinity to whatever the minimum is for this lens. Then the bottom is the aperture. And so why is this important to have these markings up here for the focus? Because as Tony was saying, having those markings, you actually are setting the focus for this lens. That's something that you cannot do with a standard autofocus lens.
And there it is on the Milvus, which is the lens that Zeiss makes for the Nikon and the Canon. This is a Nikon mount. So the Canon doesn't have the aperture ring on it, but then the Nikon mount does.
So it saves time too, because if you're out shooting and say like for example, when Tracy, you and Neil saw that sunset and the rainbow and you had to quickly stop. Well, if you have to, like, if you shut your camera off and turn it back on, you have to reset your focus every single time. You don't have to do that with the mechanical lens, and you're exactly certain of where your focus is for the shot. And for landscapes, I any kind of cityscape or something like that is, you can throw up any photo, Tony, and
Okay. Yep.
um, having the focus right where I want. Like this photo was one that I took with the Loxia 21, and I used a ND 10 stop filter for this shot. And so I put my focus on the area that I wanted to zoom in. So once you start manually focusing on the lens, because it's a native E mount manual, it'll automatically trigger the magnification on the lens if you have that enabled. So I can actually, be truly zoomed in to where I want to shoot, and just change my focus, use the focus peaking. I'm good to go. Don't have to worry about it. Once it's set, it's set. Don't have to touch it. Now that's got me in trouble once because I accidentally touched my focus on a shot before and didn't know it until I just something said review your shot and make sure that you got that in focus, and I did, and it was not in focus, and I was upset. So since some of my exposures are really really long, and the lighting and what's happening right then might be a shot that I want to take, I need everything to be perfect for that frame, because if I screw that up, I'm not going to get that back, because I'm usually going about 2 minutes, sometimes 3 or 4 minutes long with my long exposures. So like some of these shots, like the one that's on the screen now, that was a shot that I took with the 21 Loxia, and that one is with a 6 stop CPL, I believe. I think that's just a CPL on that one.
Hey,
No,
Greg, we are doing great.
I actually used the 10 stop for that shot. That's a 10 stop. The one that looks like that's from a different angle, that one is with 2 different filters. So I've stacked my filters the 6-stop dark CPL, as well as a 3-stop ND filter.
Wow. Okay. So
So
how?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tony.
Oh, I was just gonna say. So how long did your exposure end up being?
That was exactly my question.
You all have read each other's minds. So
We're like twinsies today. Just,
so the image that's up there now, that was a 30-second exposure. So that one wasn't very long. Shot at f14, ISO 50, 30-second exposure and that's with the Loxia 35 for that one. So that one's a little bit tighter than the other image that's like it that was shot with 21. And then I switched filters to the 10-stop ND filter. So right now, because I stacked, I was still getting 9 stops. So once I switched, still getting around the same time frame.
So these are they're photo stacked. Because I was going to ask you how much post was because I know that's it's hard for me to
well,
tell
photo
what's
stacked
going
or
on.
filter stacked?
Filter stack.
Ah, okay.
Filter stacked.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so what he's doing is he's using the ND filters to stop down the camera,
Oh,
so
got it.
that when it's really bright outside, he can still make a long, slow exposure and not
Right.
overexpose.
So yeah, no, I thought you were image stacking. My apology.
So Kenneth, tell us a little bit about using the ND filters, because that's a concept I really haven't played with.
So I use two kinds of filters. I use just a standard neutral density, and then I also use what's called a dark polarizing filter. So it's a combination of a circular polarizer plus has the capability of like an ND filter in
So
restricting.
how much does your polarizer stop you down?
So that one is the one that's different from my other filters. It sits in the middle and it's a 6-stop. The reason I have a 6-stop and it's the one that's the combo is because that range usually works, pretty much most of the time. It's a good in between. It's not going to give me a shutter speed that's way too long, where sometimes the 10-stop may be, or the 3 where it may not be restricting the light enough, depending on what time of day that I'm shooting. I don't have the luxury to always shoot, at sunrise or sunset time, and sometimes I'm a little earlier in the day than what I would prefer. So that's why I have the different filters. I have a 3-stop ND, 6-stop dark CPL, and a 10-stop ND. And so the 6-stop, I use that sometimes in combination with the standard NDs if I need more stops of light restricted. But then two, it's also taking away, like the shot that Tony has up there now. That's with the 6-stop, just the 6-stop circular polarizer and dark filter. The reason for that is because that water that's at the bottom of the frame, kind of leading a little bit towards the fall, if I didn't have that filter, what would happen is that you'll see a really harsh mirroring kind of effect coming off of the water. And for shooting landscapes, I want to eliminate that. So that's why I will, apply the circular polarizing filter to minimize that glaring that's on the surface of water.
So it's kind of the same concept we talked about last week with George Mitchell and the beverages.
Absolutely. So that's how come last week, if you remember the question that I asked him when he was talking about using the different kinds of filters, how does that play in the work that he does? I'm thinking from this kind of regards of doing landscapes. And I thought it was so neat of him talking about using filters for the type of work that he does to do different kinds of effects and have different kind of results from the images that he was doing. So that really intrigued my mind by seeing that and him kind of discussing that with us. So that's how come I posed that question out there.
So tell us what circumstances are you using the 3 versus the 6 versus going all the way to 10, or do you go to 13? Are you still stacking the polarizer in there?
I think the most I have gone before is maybe 16, stacking the 6 and the 10. And that's when I was really out in, some harsh lighting. The time where I'll use a 3 is if it's kind of a little bit before, the sun has completely gone down. but my shutter speed is still slightly too fast, and I need to restrict a little bit of light in my image. So I'll use the 3-stop for that. It's not one of my most used filters. The 6 and the 10 are the most used. The 3-stop is kind of like the filter that I'll throw on just to get a little bit extra stoppages, I would say. And it cuts enough to where if I'm still trying to shoot internally in the camera, going to, not to exceed that 30-second threshold that's in the camera, I'll throw on the 3-stop if I, will be able to still get a long exposure without having to plug in a remote. Because for most of these images, I have to use a remote to trigger to go into bulb mode.
Yeah, my BFF George Mitchell is in the conversation, so he said thank you on the nice words.
Oh, awesome!
We had this long running joke about the BFF between the two of us, and we really have become very good friends. So I appreciate you being on with us last week, George, and I shouted out to Greg Waterman when I saw him pop up and interrupted Kenneth. So I'm sorry, Kenneth.
Oh, and then I was using his old lenses, the Loxius. One of the shots that's of the leaf that I had is one where it's on my new camera, my latest, the A6400, and that's with the Loxia 35 f2. Now, no filters are on that one, but I mean, just on my Instagram, I actually have where some of these images I had shown the before and after, and it's almost effortless to what I'm able to capture with these lenses, because all I pretty much did for that was just made the vignetting around it a little bit more harsh. That's all I really had to do. I didn't have to.
Now, did you do the vignetting in post, or did you do it in camera?
I had a little bit in camera, not that harsh though, because that would be very difficult to unless I kind of focus stacked, or I'm sorry, image stacked, where I took one that was a little bit underexposed and took the same shot at the proper exposure. I could have done that too. But that was done in post to get vignetting a little bit more harsh than what it is. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And that's actually at the closest focusing distance for 35. I wanted to see how close can I get with this lens. And I got pretty close. I was like,
I should have, Sonia, I should have sent you the photo of the dragonfly that I took with the 40 last week.
Oh, I don't have that one. Yeah.
I got really close on that. I
was going to talk because a lot of what you guys are talking about artistically is really moving away from the fast shoot. I'm on the street, I need to catch this person, or as we were talking, the last headshot person, or when Neil was talking about doing 15 or 20 and getting done in 10 minutes, the landscapes seem to really allow you to slow down and really think about the composition and putting that together. And I was going to even, some of the stuff that you're doing, Tracy, really kind of lends itself right to almost being fine art. You've taken an image that we've talked about a little bit, and then said, what can I do? What can I do with this early morning shot? And then actually, if you want to tell us about this one and how you kind of the process of creating that piece of essentially what's been now become fine art.
And I shot this for a magazine. Every year I shoot for the carpet industry, has me shoot their tournament, and we go out early one morning and we shoot beauty images for the magazine that they produce. And this one's actually hanging behind me. It's printed on rice paper. So what I was really looking for in this shot was I wanted all of the details to pop all the way through, even to the shadows of the trees far in the distance, so that you had all of this layering and you just see the layers and layers and layers of details. That's kind of what I was going to, and it's one of my favorite places in the world. This is at Barnsley Gardens in Adairsville, Georgia, and they have a parterre garden. So I was capturing both the parterre garden, but if you look really carefully into the distance, you can see the fountain and the ruins, and the fountain and the ruins are really what they're known for. That's their logo is designed around it. The whole property is really built around those ruins. So it's in the shot, but it's kind of the center of where everything, all of the leading lines take you to that. So it's really what I was going for when I was looking at this. I was looking at my leading lines, I was looking at my detail, I was looking at my shadow, I was looking at my layers. And then when I got back, the only real post that I did to this image is I put it into, first of all, I made it monochromatic. I changed the contrast. I really, I don't think I'm looking at it now. I don't think I really changed the contrast all that much because I was shooting with a Nikon D80, D850, and the lens on this one is the 15 millimeter Milvus. It was the prototype at the time. I think it was, I had the prototype lens. And, but what I did is I layered in like a brush stroke and a little bit of wax into the Photoshop file, but just generally blended. So there's not a lot of Photoshop work on this. And then I printed it on rice paper. And if you guys have ever printed on rice paper, it's the moment the ink hits it, it disperses and absorbs. So I used an entire pack of rice paper to get one print, and it's hanging behind me. But it was, I told Tony earlier, it's like I yearn for the days where I could just lose myself in a full day of printing on a particular paper and not do anything else but focus on how the ink was absorbing. It was such a pleasure to go through that entire experience. But I worked a lot with Arthur Rainville, who I'm hoping we can get on our program at some point. And Arthur and I had talked about the value of not always doing my portraits as fine art, but introducing landscapes.
Right.
And that as I want to move to galleries and museums, that they don't always want to see a particular person, that I needed something else to shoot. So I started looking at landscape in a different way, and how could I translate this into the fine art and the gallery work that I want to move towards.
I was just looking up I have the original color, but I don't think I'm going to show it because I think that I enjoy that the final piece that much better. I think the treatment that you brought to it, having okay, I'm going to sneak it in here. Sorry, but to see how you've gone from what it's a photo, and it's a good photo, but what the treatments that you've done and the thought process that you just took us through to get to that rice paper image just really kind of lends itself to that opportunity to slow down and to think about how you're composing this and what it means to you, or what it might mean to someone who passes by it in a gallery or hanging on a wall. And that's really kind of a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing in what you and Ken have brought to show everyone is just that thought process. It's not about the quick capture or the something that I'm doing this out of love, and it really is showing in the pieces that you're putting together.
So I went to an exhibit by Karsh, who is, well-known 20th century contemporary photographer. And I noticed in all of his, I think they were silver gelatin prints, but they all had, they had this incredible amount of depth and detail. So you could see detail in the shadows all the way through of the images as they were layered. And that really inspired me to try to get that in that image. I think that I had just come off the Karsh exhibit when I did that image, and I was heavily inspired by Karsh. And I don't know if you have this one.
Oh, yep, I can get that one real quick.
So this one I just recently took during the pandemic. This is one of my pandemic images, and what you can't really tell on the screen is, and again, this one I was actually shot on the Sony my first week of having the A7R4. And I think I used the Bodice 40 on this image. But what I then did is I just took it to monochromatic. I didn't play with, I'm looking at the print, I really didn't play with my contrast all that much. It's pretty much out of camera. But when I took it to monochromatic, I printed it on, this is the new Hahnemühle, I think this is the agave paper. And okay. It's just got like a light watercolor texture, but the paper had just come out. So again, I printed several sheets to figure out how to print on it. But I love the cool of the paper. It's just there's something about seeing the images on paper and to actually be able to hold them and handle them and look at the tonality and the detail that makes an image really special. So that's kind of where I want to go with stuff.
I
I have a
certainly agree.
question.
And then of course, Kenneth, your images you have hanging behind you are, are terrific black and whites too. I know the Astor Place one is one of my favorites. It crops up in a lot of the work that I sneak out for Zeiss. So shows up in a lot of my presentations.
Um, Tracy, as far as being that you're mostly a manual lens shooter, um, how the fact that you're also kind of transitioning to using some of the autofocus bodice lenses, how many images do you generally take for your landscapes? Do you see that, because kind of where I'm directing the question is, in using a manual lens as opposed to not a focus lens, as Tony, to kind of emphasize what Tony was saying, you're actually having to take a little bit more time to capture your compositions. And it's not so much about speed at that point. You're more focused on the actual photography that you're doing. And it's not, oh, snap a shot and then you're off to the next thing. You actually have to really think about what you're doing and, make sure that the composition works for what you're doing or what you're trying to use the image for. Do you see that the amount of shots that you would take for a landscape and how you go about your composition is still the same in using
Yeah.
autofocus lenses as opposed to your manual?
Well, that cottage one is really probably the only. I think that may be the only landscape that I have with the autofocus lens, and that just was the 40 was just the whitest thing I had in my car. So I used for quite a while. I used a Nikon D800, which takes 3 seconds per 3 frames per second. So it's almost, I mean, it's just barely slower than the Hasselblad medium formats that from prior to that. It's not a very fast lens, and even now I think my D850 will do 8 or 9 frames per second. It's still a pretty slow lens, so I'm not rapidly firing, and I'm just changing to the Sony. So and I rarely really use the bodice because I usually use an Otis on the Sony. So my habits haven't changed any. And then and Tony has pointed this out to me before. I have this bad habit of once I kind of envision the frame, and once I've got it, I just stop because I've got what I was looking for. And he's always, pushing me, go a little past, be a little bit more creative, shoot a little bit more. I'm trying to do that a little bit with that cabin. I didn't rapidly take the images. I still slowly took them, but I did move around and actually move inside and to the window and shot through the windows. So I tried some different compositions. I'm trying to be a little bit more creative there because I do tend to see a scene and take that image, and then once I feel like I've nailed the detail in the image, I'm done. So just trying to push myself a little bit for some different perspective more than speed.
The image that I had that we used on the graphic for Instagram, that photo was, so when I go out with my friend David for our waterfall excursions, we usually may go to about 3 waterfalls in a day. And so the amount of pictures that I come out with may be about 30 or so. And that photo was one of the most difficult ones to capture. It wasn't about necessarily the composition itself. It was getting to the falls. So this is a waterfall that's in Tennessee. And it's actually at a state park. This is a Fall Creek Falls State Park. And there's many waterfalls within, it's a very, very big location. And this waterfall is actually, you view it from an overlook, but that's not where this is shot from. There's actually a cable trail that's off the side of a cliff. And so you have to rappel down the side, and it's a pretty long drop off. And you have to go down on a cable and rope off the side of this to get that angle. And so it's not in this shot, but there's actually a second waterfall that's much higher up off to the left. Can't see it in that shot. And I saw that waterfall, the conditions were perfect. the overcast, one thing that a lot of people are always surprised about is when it's overcast or raining. That's when I go out shooting, because those are when I get the best colors. I don't like shooting when it's, no cloud in sight, or when there's, um, you know, nothing going on in the sky, which one of the shots that I have is a lower angle shot. It's a vertical shot. Let's see what number that one is. That would be 3039, Tony. Um, you can flip to that one if
Yep.
you
Yep. All set.
want to, but I'm talking about both of them.
Okay.
So this one was shot at a time that I hated, and I did not like this falls. So I actually cut off the falls because there was a boat that got stuck. That's number one. There was a hot spot in the falls. That's number two. And then there was no cloud in sight. That was three. Those are my three strikes right there. So I decided to take the 50. I rarely shoot with the 50, which is interesting because the first Loxy I ever tried was the 50, and I used it for everything. But then I get it, and it's not always one that I use that much. But I decided for this, the 50 would be perfect. So I cut off the part of the falls that was in the sun's path, and it was a hot spot. There was no way I could get the exposure right for that, because this shaded area, I had to bring that up in post, whereas the part that was directly in the sun, completely gone. You could not see it. Any kind of long exposure you did, you were going to overexpose that. And so I didn't want to do multiple images and combine them later. I generally don't do that. I try to be like Tracy in some regards. I don't like to be stuck behind a computer, and so I tend to not do that. So in this situation, I'm like, I took that shot. I only took two. I was like, okay, I'm done. Don't need to do anymore. The other waterfall, I saw it. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I couldn't ask for anything better than this. Everything was perfect. The overcast had just little puffs of clouds that were coming every now and then while we were down there. I took 7 frames, and my friend David, he was like, "Oh, take your time. You can shoot." I was like, "I'm done." He was like, "Really?" I was like, "I'm done. I got what I need. I don't need anything else. There's nothing else that I can get. This is perfect. Like the conditions were perfect." For that one, I didn't even use a circular polarizer, because I really, it wasn't much reflection off the water to begin with. Everything just worked. I just used a 10 stop ND. I think that was maybe about 2 minutes, a minute and a half, 2 minute exposure, and it was beautiful. I was like, I love it. And so the reason I kind of approach it that way and not take that many shots is because I don't want to go through 150 pictures of the same thing. I don't need that. And especially shooting with the cameras that we have, and always help having good lenses. I don't I know what I'm getting is going to be perfect. And I'm sure Tracy would agree, ZEISS lenses just capture great stuff. So I'm like, you don't need a lot.
No, and I think we do. We compose in our head. So I mean, you see the same thing through your street photography that you see in your landscapes. I mean, just we look at it and we see the shots, and that's maybe just somewhat the artist in us. We don't. I don't ever feel the need to really shoot a lot of it. I'm just looking for the precision of what I want. I want to make sure that all of the detail is there, that the shapes, the shadows, the layers, that is going to be there later on for me to use. Otherwise, I've wasted the opportunity. So what I'm looking at more is whether or not I've got all my details, as opposed to, trying to move around and change up my shot a lot.
There's a shot that I had from the waterfall that I didn't like. There's one that I took of some rocks. And that was actually like where I shot the falls. I just looked down and I'm like, oh, this is a better shot than the waterfall itself. And so I decided to just take the 35 Loxia. And I've never really focused a lot on texture shots or anything like that. And so I just said, oh, let me take a shot of this. I thought the way that the rocks were, very beautiful. And so I just took that shot, and I was like, oh wow, that's a nice shot. And because I was trying to salvage a location that I wasn't happy with. So sometimes that does happen. Before we go to any of these locations, we've already mapped out everything where we're going, and so that way we're not losing time, and can actually get what we want to shoot in for whatever specific excursion that we're doing. And so we don't know exactly how something is until we're, physically there to see it for ourselves and what the conditions are. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. Just like the some of the other waterfall photos, the time that we go out is very key, because it cannot be after there has been no rain, because then there's very little water. Then the second thing is, it has to be at least 3 days after it has rained. If we've had a lot of rain going on, it has to be a few days after that. Because if you go the next day after, it may rain a few days, and then the next day it's clear, and you go to a waterfall, the water is going to be brown. And I don't want that in pictures. So that's why we wait at least about 3 or so days before we go. So that way the runoff has cleared itself out, and then the waterfall it's not overflowing to where it's too powerful to get sort of like the streaks that you see in this falls here. So this was about, I'd say maybe about 3 or so days after it rained. That's not as full as that waterfall can get. It was just enough so that way you can see the separation of the rocks behind the waterfall. And for the images that I take, I really want that in my photo, because I think it exaggerates a little bit more of the long exposure that I'm doing. Because if it's just a big white blob in my long exposure, there's not much that you can really connect with. There's no defining lines. There's no defining details in the water, or in the textures. And so it's most times we've actually lucked out as far as what we actually go out and capture. It's very rare that we'll come into a situation to where it's a complete bust, to where we see it and we're like, this won't work. There's no good photo that you can get out of this. Sometimes it does happen, but it's very rare, because we do take our time to really kind of look at the photos that we're taking. So like this shot is one that was in Georgia. This this one was, I don't even know how we found this, but it's not on any kind of major like park website or anything like that. And the first time we went there, we actually passed it multiple times. And I was navigating, and so it was my fault. But we just sometimes expect the waterfalls to be a little bit harder to get to than what this was. It literally was off the side of the road. All I had to do was turn my head. I'm like, oh, there it is. So this one has two. This is in Rabun County, Georgia, and there's two falls. There's a upper and a lower, and so this one is the upper. And the first time we ever went here, there was more water there, but this day it was perfect. It was the right water flow, because sometimes what we run into when there's too much water is that you get the mist that comes back on you. And so that, you have to keep cleaning your lens and things like that. And then of course, kind of cover up any of the rock that's behind, so you can't see those textures. But that specific day, it was just perfect. The water flow was a lot better than the first time that we had went. And so what I'm generally looking for, and I've talked about this in my street shots, I always put things in my foreground that really doesn't serve a purpose to be there, but it just adds the dimension for my kind of perspective. So I got as low as I could, and it's always good to have a tripod that doesn't have the center column. And if it does, have one that's removable to where you can make it a shorter one. So that way you can get a low angle photo like this. And I just like having things that's in the foreground. I sometimes have shots where you see the trees kind of in the foreground blowing around. I don't correct that. I don't take two shots and stack the image. I just keep it as is. And I like the moving leaves. That's something that's natural. And so for this shot, I just wanted a very, very low angle, and I used the 21. when I first got the lens, I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to use this much because my people know me from using the 16 to 35 Sony Zeiss. And I always think, oh, I need the wider because that's just what my mind is programmed to. I need the width, even though I might not really need that wide, but it's just 16. Oh, I gotta have 16. But Tony, he convinced me that it was like, I to use the Zeiss only lenses. So that kind of imprinted in my mind, okay, let me just try to stick to the Zeiss only lenses. And so I try to take just the 21. So for this, I don't even take the 16 to 35. I don't want to be subjected to even pulling that out the bag. So I took the 21. I'm like, this is the perfect composition. I don't need to crop anything. It's perfect. And most of my shots that I've been taking now, the 21 is the perfect focal length. I have not used my 16-35 in, I want to say at least like 4 or 5 months.
That's really,
And
yeah. It's a really good challenge for yourself, and you just get a lot of some of the exactness that we've been talking about with a manual lens. When you move from a zoom to a prime focus, you really get that. But I love it, and it's one of the things that my counterpart and coworker Rich Looning always talks about is take a lens, a focal length, and really challenge yourself. Do a whole wedding, and we've actually challenged people to do a whole wedding on an 18. And you'd be surprised at what you can get when you really challenge yourself to look at things a little differently. And you can see that in some of the images that you're bringing forward, is that it really kind of puts you in a position to say, where I would just zoom and bang bang bang, I've got what I need. Now I have to think about where I'm going to put my tripod. Is this the right angle? Am I close enough? Am I going to get the bokeh that I want? And it's really it excites it. And I know, as just as a beginner that I am, it really excites me because I hate wides. I don't know how you guys do it. But okay, so I know I have a challenge there, and so there'll be weekends where I'll take the 18, and I'm like, ugh, I can't get anything. But then when I start to slow down and think about my composition, things start to come together, and it really just kind of makes your brain focus, and it brings more art to the frame, and that's really why we're all here. So
And so I see George Mitchell made a comment about such a peaceful capture, and that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about with this particular program is what we can do during this pandemic. A lot of us don't have. I'm lucky right now because I'm back at work. I'm not sure how long that's going to last, but I'm back in front of people. But in the meantime, some of the things we can do. I know when I got the slave cabin that I got, the tar paper house, I drove about 30, 40 minutes from myself. I knew that it was there, and I really wanted to, in the back of my mind, I wanted to shoot this for a while. So I just made that one of my pandemic projects to go to shoot that particular building. And how many more of the tar paper houses are there going to be before they're completely gone?
right.
So I was a woman on a mission. And Kenneth has been, his social distancing is a perfect thing for him and just this one other person that he's been with, that they can go out and do this and not see any other souls. These are some good projects, some good meaty projects that we can kind of get around during the pandemic, and then we can come back and play with them if we want. It gives us really some focus. For me, it was using the new camera. For Kenneth, it was just the experience of the peacefulness of the waterfalls and trying to capture the motion in the way he did. So I think that these are all things that we can do now with our camera and our gear and our brains to kind of, not feel like we're just completely out of the game and sitting at home. So that was one of the reasons we wanted to bring this whole segment to you.
yeah, I know for some, it will be something that, if they're going out into nature, for example, it might be something that they don't do at all or have never even tried. But I think at this time, this is the perfect time to try because you have the opportunity to, you can sit down, you can, look at things, practice, tinker with things, and, you might grow and have a new love that you didn't know that was there. And it can also benefit you in other areas that you might do. You have no idea what it can do for your work and kind of add new creativity, some new thought processes in what you're doing. I know for me, it has helped me understand that I was getting so used to doing street that in using an autofocus lens, I'm generally, sometimes I connect with what I'm shooting and sometimes I might have a disconnect. Before the pandemic, the week before everything had shut down, I just brought back my A6000 and was using the Loxia lenses on that. And I was taking photos that were, very different. I actually had to slow down, really think about what I was doing, think about the composition. Some of the shots that I took, I'm actually like got in a position that I'm like, okay, I want to be here. And I waited and to see what would happen. I didn't just keep walking. Sometimes, New York is a very fast paced place. And I'm just walking. It's like I have nowhere to go. Why am I rushing? That's just how my mind was processing and being able to, I'm using an A9 and I had this discussion on Instagram where the difference of and reason why I still have my A6000, which is now a 6-year-old camera, as well as my A9, is because, I will say this about myself. To shoot with the A6000 takes skill. To shoot with my A9, I don't need to think about it. You cannot take a bad shot with an A9. I will honestly tell people this. Some of the shots that I have taken, I kid you not, I didn't have to think about it. It's just because the camera is so good. But if I can take a photo with the 6000, I'm impressed at myself because that camera has basically none of the same features as the 9. It doesn't have the real-time IAF that the 9 does. I don't have the same, it does 10, 11 frames a second. A9 does 20 frames. That camera doesn't have the blackout on the screen when you're shooting in burst. That camera, it's a lot of different things that the 9 has where it kind of takes technology more in the hands of the photographer is more so than the skill of the photographer in the photography, if that makes sense. And so that's why I've have kept my older camera bodies and why I've gone back to shooting manual, because it's now making me slow down and analyze what I'm shooting. Whereas I think I was starting to lose a little bit of that in what I did. And I'm usually pretty good at knowing when I've lost touch with myself and will do things to kind of get back to that. And so that's why my last time, shooting street was completely manual.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I think we are we are about at our hour. That went really quickly.
It did.
It's so funny. I shoot landscapes for myself. I don't often, well, that one was for a magazine, but I don't often get to shoot them for other people. So sharing them is really unusual for me. And
Tony showed another New York photo up there, and I'm like, I'm just sitting here. I'm like, how in the world have I never seen any of these photos? Because I think the one where it was like, had that really warm tone, that's got to be my favorite one. I'm like,
yeah, and that was just adjusting. That was adjusting the white balance, and I did not do that in post. I did that in camera. So
the gold one?
Yeah. The gold one. That was just me standing there deciding to play with the white balance so I could see what was going on in the sky.
There's another one which I think you actually just turned. I believe it was actually the same day.
It was, and that's exactly what I did.
And it's a completely different shot. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that one actually led me to the other one, to the second one, because I saw the copper tones in this. So then all of a sudden I wanted to play with the copper tones, but it was, it was just me trying to capture that rainbow while the rainbow was there. But at the same time, I was shooting with a new lens. I didn't often shoot with the Milvus 35. It was a brand new lens for ZEISS, and just playing with the verticals, trying to see what I keep straight, and as long as I wasn't trying on Neil's patience, since he was he was my ride and my host.
Yeah, he was the chauffeur.
He was busy shooting too, so I got lucky there.
Yeah, no, I've seen his as well from that day. It was a great few moments to capture the weather and the just the composition of the the city. It's funny.
I will.
I used to know someone who lived on that side. I'm like, oh, God, why do you live in Jersey City? And they're like, look at what we get to see every day,
It
and
was
it
stunning.
is, yeah, and it's just a great backdrop.
Yeah, and some people are like, yeah, I rather just see the view of the city than be in the city.
Yeah, we're slowly getting back there, but it'll be some time before I dip a toe across the bridge. So. Well, yeah, as you were saying, thanks to you two, we had a really good fast hour today. Great conversation. Thanks, Kenneth and Tracy, for sending me your photos and really sharing the how you compose within the frame. It's really excellent, and I think that a lot of what we can make out of this current time is really helping us to build the art and to get back to why we do what we do. And it's really thank you both for sharing your insight on that.
No
And
problem.
and thanks to everybody else who came along on this journey. We certainly invite you to share your art with us as well. You can find us all on Instagram, and all of that information's in the YouTube page. But yeah, no, happy to see what you guys are working on too. And I hope that are able to take some time and just kind of think about what you're doing within the frame and build your art and make imagery and compositions that you want to see and show people. And that's really what it's all about and why we're all here. So then, thank you very much for staying with us this hour, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye bye now.